Welcome to another edition of Educate and Protect video podcast brought to you by Kavanack. These video podcasts are designed to give you short 10 to 15 minute questions and answers on current and relevant information and topics affecting your business. Our goal is to help you better understand the present so you can have confidence in the future. My name is Diana Dix. I am the HR Risk Advisor here at Kavanack and your host for today's video podcast. With me, we have a very special guest that I'm excited to be partnering up on this video podcast, and that is Iris Christoph. She's a labor and employment attorney at Dunn DeSantis, Walton Kendrick. She counsels clients on risk management and litigation avoidance on various topics of employment disputes. So Iris, welcome.
Thank you, Diana, for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about this topic as long as you'll let me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to cover, and it's one of those topics that a lot of clients have questions. They want to know just what's to come, what's next. So obviously, what we're talking about today is vaccines and what you as the employer need to know before you make any decisions as to what direction you're going to take with regards to vaccines, what the cultural impact is, and ensuring that you're aware of what are the employer regulations surrounding vaccines. So I guess the first question that I have for you, Iris, is can employers mandate vaccines on all of their employees once those vaccines become available to them?
This is the million-dollar question. This is a brand new topic, a brand new issue in the law. I'm going to answer the question, but I'm going to have to take a little bit of a road to get there. There's a couple sources of law that we look at to figure out, is a mandatory employee vaccination program lawful? So the EEOC has issued guidance on this topic. They have said that within certain parameters, a mandatory COVID-19 vaccination program could be lawful if it's done properly. And when I say done properly, there needs to be exceptions for certain employees who are requesting accommodations for religious or medical reasons. But more broadly, in the state of California, there are simply no regulations stating one way or the other if a employer or employee vaccination program that's required is lawful. So that all being said, there is also another issue with a mandatory vaccination program, and really that stems from the nature of the COVID-19 vaccination. It only has an emergency use authorization right now. So by law, anyone who's receiving the vaccination must be told that it's voluntary. So if you as an employer require your employees to receive a COVID-19 vaccination, you're going to run into a little bit of a conundrum, because when they get the actual vaccination, they're going to be told that they have the right to say no. And so really, you need to think about it in that context. Certainly, it could be done. I think it's a little early, unless you have some medical healthcare workers as employees. If you just got client-facing or public-facing employees, my recommendation right now is to implement a voluntary vaccination program where you offer incentives and you look at your specific workers and determine which of those workers should you really be pushing to get vaccinated. You're not going to be requiring them, but you're going to be pushing them either via money, time off, just putting words of support out there if your business is not interested in putting money in their pocket to get a vaccination. And then there's also some documentation that you can provide your workers. So the long and short of it is, yes, technically these programs they can be lawful if done right, but it is quite risky to implement a mandatory program at this stage in the game.
Yeah, and I mean, because it's obviously these vaccines are not readily available to everyone, so it's way too early, and there might be more litigation that will come down the pipe as we, get closer to having more of a mass population. But I'm also have a question with regards to employee privacy and confidentiality concerns when when employers are trying to determine vaccines or mandating vaccines and determining, can I reveal to my customers, to the population, that we're a vaccinated population, right? Where we take all the safety precautions. We've got people in our workplace that are all vaccinated. What concerns are there with regards to that kind of communication?
I think you could make that kind of communication, but I would tweak the messaging a little bit. Whatever your business is, insert the business name. We take COVID-19 very seriously. We are operationally in accordance with all state, federal, and local regulations relating to COVID-19 workplace safety, including, and then you could put a caveat in there that including regarding COVID-19 vaccinations. But it's just so early right now because it's highly unlikely that all your employees, unless you're in the medical profession and providing direct patient care, highly unlikely your employees are going to be vaccinated at this stage in the game. So it's a little early to put that kind of messaging out there. But I think eventually down the line, that's going to be a big message to all my clients are wondering that, like, how can I get my people to get vaccinated so that my customers and clients feel safe? And right now, encourage them via monetary and other kinds of incentives, and start putting the word out there to your clients that, hey, we're doing everything in our power that we can to follow all the recommendations, all the public health recommendations. But I would not, I would just message that as we're in compliance with all, public health guidance and recommendations. I wouldn't go to the level of specifically stating that our employees are vaccinated. That I could foresee running into some privacy issues.
Yeah. And I mean, with that, I mean, it's something else comes to mind is as high-risk population gets vaccinated, and you have applicants coming in and applying for positions, can employers ask whether that employee has been vaccinated or not?
Well, it's interesting because it's going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on the position. If you've got a position available and it's for someone who'd be exclusively working remotely, my recommendation would be don't ask that question. You're just looking to open up a can of worms. Number two, if you want to ask the question because it's a safety sensitive position where a COVID-19 vaccination is recommended by, local, state, federal public health, I think that absolutely you can ask the question, but what you need to be careful about is that follow-up question if that person says no. You do not want to ask, why have you not been vaccinated? Because guess what? The first thing that they could do is disclose a disability, and then we're on notice and we have to start the reasonable accommodation process. So once you ask why have you not been vaccinated, you have opened up a can of worms. You need to work with your legal counsel about how to approach those types of questions, because we can probably get the information that you're looking for, but just in a better way. So tread with caution, tread carefully during interviews, but certainly depending on the position, I think it's a viable question if the position calls for it.
Okay, very good. The other question that we have, or that comes in quite a bit, what about employees who refuse to get a vaccine, whether it's mandated or not? What happens? What can an employer do, or should they do with those employees who refuse to get vaccinated?
Well, again, it's ultimately going to depend on their job. If the employee's working remotely, I'm not going to recommend that you take any kind of adverse employment action. I think there should be a dialogue with the employee at some level, and make expectations clear. If there is guidance in your industry that states that the employee should be vaccinated because they call it an occupational risk, number one, you need to look at it from a workers' comp perspective. Could there be some sort of potential workers' comp claim that could arise from not having your employees vaccinated? Because if that's the case, then that discussion needs to happen, and you need to loop in legal counsel and start having that talk with that employee. Again, that's likely not going to be the blanket rule for every type of position, but if it's safety sensitive and it's a forward-facing, client-facing position where you need to be vaccinated, you need to have that conversation carefully, and in a way that focuses on the risk to the employee given their job. Not so much, why are you not doing it, but hey, this is a requirement for our position based on the local public health guidance. Again, I think it's early to be having those conversations just because of what you mentioned, Diana, the supply and demand issue. Mm-hmm. You might not be able to find candidates that are vaccinated. So you got to kind of walk back that approach at this juncture.
Okay. Now, do employers have to provide some form of a accommodation for those employees who just cannot, due to an underlying health condition, due to maybe religious belief? What is that process that employers need to take in those instances?
So in those instances, if you have reason to know that the employee has some sort of disabling medical condition that would interfere with their ability to get a vaccination, the accommodation process under the Fair Employment and Housing Act commences, similar to an employee that you believe would have a request for accommodation based on a religious belief. There can always be a religious belief to support the non-vaccination. So I wouldn't dismiss any request for accommodation from an employee to opt out of the vaccination program. Do not dismiss it outright. Don't terminate them. Don't take adverse employment action against them. You need to start the accommodation process, and we all know how the accommodation process starts with documentation. You're going to document every step, every conversation you have with that employee. You're going to follow up in writing after you speak with them about the kinds of things that they'll need to do their job safely without a vaccination. And then it's on the employer to determine, is that a reasonable accommodation? Does it pose an undue hardship? Am I legally required to provide that kind of accommodation? Maybe that accommodation is you switch an employee from a public-facing job into potentially job duties that wouldn't require interaction with the public, something along those lines. Those are the types of accommodations that I foresee that will be requested. And so brush up on your FEHA accommodation process, interactive process requirements.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ready now, because these issues are going to start coming up quickly.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that the other factor too, a good point that you made, is the fact that just because someone doesn't have a vaccine, or they even get their vaccines, it doesn't mean that it exempts an employer from still ensuring that the safety protocols are in place in the organization to safeguard all workers, all their customers, everyone from getting COVID-19 or spreading COVID-19.
That's another big piece of the puzzle. I have many clients who come to me and say, once my employees are vaccinated, if they get vaccinated, do they still need to wear a mask? Do they still need a social distance? CDC right now says yes. Everyone needs to continue to follow all those required workplace safety protocols, social distancing, hand washing, and face coverings in the workplace. That's not gone away yet, so we can't rest too easy on the vaccinations.
No, and I think that the main thing is the fact that it's a slow process. We're just at the very beginning with regards to distribution, and there's still a lot that need to go, even in the first phase. And we've got many phases to go before we even get to that point of determining what type of program or policy we want within our organization. I have a follow-up question. So with having policies in place, I have been seeing a lot of policies circulating with regards to voluntary or mandatory policies for vaccine. What is your recommendations for employers what action should they take now in preparation for more mass distribution?
Yeah, as we're starting to see the rollout increase, I think this weekend, San Diego County is rolling out to food and agricultural workers. So to gear up for that, start your messaging to your employees now. So you need to figure out what's going to be right for your business. You need to think about, do we want to offer an incentive? If we offer an incentive, what's that going to look like? Is it going to look like money, or is it going to look like time off from work? How much do we want to push our employees to get vaccinated? I think the incentives are great if you want to, if and when the timing is right. I think right now your employees likely are going to rush out and try to get a vaccination appointment. There's only so many appointments to go around, so you can offer an incentive, but unfortunately your employees still might not be able to get an appointment. So it's a little early for the incentive program, but you should start creating it, designing it, and then once the rollout is larger and more broad, then you can actually start paying people. You could, give them, some sort of stipend, basically, an incentive stipend nation. You could give them time off from work. You can give them a PTO day, extra PTO. You can work it whatever works best for your business, and whatever you think would incentivize your employees. It's going to look different for every business, but those are the types of things that I'm seeing: extra PTO days and some sort of, cash incentive or, financial incentive.
Okay, very good.
So we're going to talk about this, Diana, but I just want to put it out there. There's also a ton of considerations about pros and cons. If you're thinking about a voluntary plan or thinking about a mandatory plan, there are some considerations for a mandatory plan that we should talk about today just briefly, because once you start going into a mandatory vaccination program, you're going to run into workers' comp issues. You're going to run into wage and hour issues that are really, really key and crucial to think about. And we also, on the flip side, with a voluntary program, we need to think about how to message our way away from those issues, meaning we want to make it very clear that the employer, if the voluntary program is, this is any employee that receives it, it's entirely voluntary. The company has, it's not making any requirement that the employee receive it, and it therefore has, absolutely no liability for any sort of illness, recovery period, anything like that an employee may require as a result of receiving the vaccination. You want to get yourself as far away from any sort of workers' comp claim for time off from work, leave time, because the employee didn't feel well after receiving the vaccination. Because if you're requiring an employee to receive it and they don't feel well after they get the vaccination, I believe that's a workers' comp issue.
Yeah. And I'm sure that that's going to be something down the line that we might end up seeing quite a bit.
We're seeing a lot of these letters of support that are going out there. From a plaintiff's perspective, I used to represent employees, so I see every issue both ways. Certainly, I would make the argument if I was representing an employee that because of this letter of support that many employers are providing to their employees to receive the vaccination, just to basically show that they do fall within a category of workers that are eligible to receive the vaccination, I would say that with that letter of support, that kind of crosses the realm of is the employer, it's not required, but is the employer supporting it to the extent that I would not have received the vaccination but for that letter of support. So I would make the argument that maybe the employer should be on the hook for my illness if I feel ill after receiving the vaccination. I think we're going to see those claims explode, and I think we're in for a wild ride.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, Iris. I really appreciate it. Now, I think the main thing is that as you as an organization decide as to how you're going to handle vaccinations within your organization, keep those best practices in mind. Obviously, ensure that you continue with your health and safety measures in place within your organization to help slow the spread of COVID-19 and exposure. And then bear in mind the legislation that is changing all the time, especially as it relates to COVID-19 pandemic. It's the constant new normal change. So keep those components in mind. You have a dedicated experts like myself in HR or even Chris Malky in safety who are here to help you through some of these questions. But also you now have a great contact at Dunn, DeSantis, Welch and Kendrick, Iris, and I will make sure that in the link to this presentation that you also have her contact information so you can reach out and get that legal advice and guidance that you need with regards to your program. So with that, it wraps up our session of Educate and Protect. I hope that the information helped you better understand the present so you can have confidence in your decisions in the future. Iris, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody stay tuned for more video podcasts. Thank you for joining.